Well, thank you very much for coming in and spending a bit of time talking a bit more about your writing in depth. It felt like a bit of a no-brainer with all the positive response that we were getting on the internet to it, that it'd be a great thing to follow up with you.
Well, as you can imagine, being diagnosed with cancer is quite a shock. And it had a very big impact upon me immediately when I went to see my GP, and she told me that she was referring me for suspected prostate cancer. I knew from the way that she spoke to me that she was convinced that's what it was.
Yeah.
So I had no doubts from the first moment. And so again, immediately I knew what I needed to do. I needed to go away and absorb it absolutely immediately, which is what I did. I walked straight out of the surgery to Victoria Park, and I walked around the pond a few times and just let it sink in and let the whole experience be complete, as raw as it could be for me, and ask myself, well, what are you going to do with your life now?
Yeah.
How are you going to deal with all this? So that was a very, very strong experience for me, a very positive one actually. Not one I would have wished upon myself or anybody else for that matter, but it was what I had to face. So I think perhaps right from the beginning my attitude was that I had to let this in completely. But by doing that, it had a more, I suppose, profound effect upon me. And I felt that it was a very, very valuable experience that I must be very careful not to lose. And the best way I knew of not losing it, in a sense, was to objectify it, to write it down. So that's how it all started. I think basically, initially, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't lose what I saw as a very valuable opportunity. It was only later when I thought a little bit more about it and was telling one or two friends that I thought, well, actually, this might actually be of interest and of benefit to others. And so that's how the whole thing started. Once it had started, I just wanted to keep going.
Yeah, I was speaking to Alex, who's in your community, the other day, and he was saying that it's actually become a whole practice around writing and then reflecting. And when I was reading about how you'd then been struggling to meditate, partly because of the pain you were in, I was interested to know if the writing and the whole sort of reflection process if that had become sort of central to your practice over maybe meditation.
Well, I think it's become my practice, but let me just make one thing clear. I wasn't actually in pain.
Oh, okay.
No, what happened was that when I started chemotherapy, I experienced what anybody who's undergone chemotherapy knows only too well. I experienced what's called chemo brain.
That was it, yeah.
And it almost deadens you. It's very difficult to communicate what it feels like to experience that dimension of chemotherapy. There's lots of other things which are unpleasant too, but it's like a total mental exhaustion. It's almost like you're no longer there at its most extreme moments. But what the overall effect of chemotherapy was upon my brain, I suppose, because it's affecting the brain as a physical organ, the chemotherapy seems to affect just about every organ in your body, is that I just did not have the necessary energy, focus to meditate. I tried, and I was able to do that for a while, but once the treatment got further and further underway, I suppose there's a certain kind of accumulation in the body or in the brain or whatever, which just rendered it, so far as I was concerned, pointless. Now, I should also say, I stopped quite deliberately because I thought it was counterproductive. And I felt that, well, the most important thing is that I should remain in a positive mental state. And I felt that overall I was. And actually, throughout this whole process, I've managed to maintain very positive mental states. And so I thought I was happy with that. But what I also noticed, and this is a strange paradox in a way, was that there were times when, in spite of the chemo brain, I felt, well, more lucid than ever. And so they were very valuable moments for me, and I tried to capture them, I tried to write about them. So it's a strange thing, but I couldn't sit down and just do the mindfulness of breathing. I'd fall asleep immediately, or I'd feel in a kind of mental fog. So that's what made meditation so difficult. And in the end I thought, well, it's not important. I've been meditating for 45 years. 6 months or whatever off is not going to do me any harm. And so I just stopped. But I'm starting again now. I'm picking up my practice of meditation again right now.
How are you finding that?
Difficult, because the chemotherapy effect is still with me to some extent. I think I'm still being affected by chemo brain. Not in a big way, not like how it was when I was right at the heart of my treatment, but it's only 6 weeks since I stopped, since I had my last infusion, which means that it's only 3 weeks since the end of the last cycle. And I gather that some of the effects do linger on for quite a while, so it's still affecting me. It'll go eventually.
Yeah. Did you actively go and sort of look for that more to sort of support you maintaining like your positive mental states, or?
Sort of. I mean, not that I felt I needed it in that sort of way, but, well, art in all its forms has always been very, very important to me.
Yeah.
Literature, painting, the theatre, of course, because that's my background, especially those poetry as well. And as I've explained in the way I've written about this, chemotherapy runs in cycles, so that it's a 3-weekly cycle. To begin with, the first couple of days are fine, then for about a week or 10 days, it's really, really difficult. And then you gradually pull out of it, so that they give you what they call a recovery week. And it was during that recovery week where I had a bit more energy, especially towards the end of that week, where I felt I had an opportunity to get out and do different things. So I always try to go either to a gallery or even go to a couple of galleries, go to see a beautiful film, go to the theatre as I did on a couple of occasions, and so on, just to sort of just break the monotony of being stuck in with this quite rigorous form of treatment, because it's pretty relentless. It certainly was a major support in helping me to maintain positive mental states. But I didn't think of it specifically as a means of doing that, although it would have that effect.
Yeah. So I am interested to know a little bit more about the ways of practicing you sort of consciously chose to help maintain your sort of mental equilibrium that you talk about a lot. So was there anything in particular you worked out was helpful to do or not to do?
Well, I think the main thing was just try to be vigilantly aware to any arising unskillful mental state. I mean, the one you'd expect to be most ready to arise is anxiety, because your life is threatened. Sometimes you're not quite sure where this is all going to end, and it could end up with a lot of pain and a slow, lingering death, that sort of thing. I didn't think about that. I knew that I was in a precarious position, and still am, but I just tried to be aware of anything like that. Occasionally I got caught out, not so much by anxiety, and that rarely affected me at all, actually, or fear, but getting caught up occasionally mentally with petty grievances. The sort of thing that people who live in communities moan and complain about. And I generally don't moan or complain about anything, but sometimes, occasionally, it creeps into my mind. And so I was very alert to that. It did happen once or twice, but as soon as I saw it there, I just dropped it. And that kept my mental equilibrium pretty clean.
And is that something you've worked on for quite a number of years? Have you always found it quite easy to be able to notice that you're sort of getting caught up in that and be able to drop it, or?
I think it probably is one of the consequences of the accumulation of spiritual practice over many years. I mean, I've been practicing Dharma for 45 years, and I hope that begins to show. And it certainly shows to me inwardly, because I know what I was like when I was 24, and I wouldn't want to go back there. It's a bit of a mess, but gradually I've seen a shift over a long period of time of, the degree of emotional positivity that I have. And I think also I've not shied away, usually at least, not shied away from difficult situations, whether that means a difficult communication with somebody, or it means going through a difficult situation, putting yourself in a difficult situation, especially in India, where I've spent a fair amount of time. I worked out that I probably spent just over 3 years of my life altogether in India. And when I first started going to India in the late 80s, early 90s, I used to travel on state buses all around Maharashtra.
Gosh.
And sometimes only staying in one place for 5 days at a time, moving on to the next place, sometimes very long bus journeys. At the outset of one of those journeys, I remember when I was travelling from Goa to Kolhapur, I remember it quite distinctly. I was with a Ditya Bodhi, and we were on this bus together, and the person behind me was drunk, and he vomited all over me right at the beginning of the trip. And there's nothing I could do about it. And of course, I hated it. And sometimes I used to hate going back to India. But I felt that even though I felt a great reluctance at times to go, I always knew that if I did go, I would come away with something, some indefinable something, which should have affected me very, very positively. Even if it was just simply listening to the sometimes quite tragic stories of some of the mitras that I met. It just touches you in quite a deep way. So that I regard as part of my training. I didn't regard that at the time, by the way. When I stopped being overall Mitra convener and no longer had the funds to go to India, I really missed it. And I just couldn't wait to get back. I think it's partly that I relish the fact that it helps me to face some of the more difficult experiences of life simply because they're thrown in your face in a way that they're not over here. Another very good example from my own life would be going into a long solitary retreat, which part of me really didn't want to do, because I knew it wasn't always going to be easy, and I was warned it wouldn't be by Subhuti, who'd already done one. I remember him saying to me, Devamitra, there'll be moments when you think you're going mad, and I thought, well, yes, that's Subhuti, but actually it was also Devamitra. And part of me relishes that kind of challenge, and of course, there's also a part of me that says, I'm not sure about this. But I usually don't let that get in the way. If I'm convinced that it's going to be of benefit to me, or perhaps even more importantly, if it's going to be a benefit to others.
And do you think part of this is a personality thing, like that sense of just being able to keep taking on these new challenges? So there's a part in your writing when you talk about, it's when you're acting, being asked by someone what you wouldn't do on stage, and you say with sort of complete conviction that there's nothing that you wouldn't do. I just sort of wonder, is that something even like in childhood, do you feel, or?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, I think that I was driven by a very strong ambition when I was an actor, and that came from a time when I was a student, and I really wanted to make the most of my opportunity. I wanted to really become a very successful actor, and so I was prepared to do anything. I think when I gave that answer that I couldn't think of anything to the director who asked me, or asked all of us, I think partly I suffered from lack of imagination. But I meant it. I mean, it was sincere. But he did push me in rehearsal. What actually happened in the end was he reduced us down to an ensemble of 11 students, and it was quite clear he was pressing us by the exercises he was getting us to do to see if any of us dare take our clothes off. Now, people are absolutely blasé about this now because it's so commonplace, but in 1968 it was a big thing. And he set this exercise, and most people took most of their clothes off, and 3 of us took everything off, including me. And I actually got incorporated into the production we did later on. So, I don't know, I mean, I think that was something quite specific, but I think it did bring to light perhaps an underlying attitude, which I then, more as time passed on, more consciously developed because of the way that Bhante was teaching us, if you like, saying that, constantly reminding us when we were younger that you don't know how lucky you are. You've not spent time in India. You don't know what difficulties people undergo there. But if you're serious about the Dharma, you need to sort of, in a sense, toughen up a bit. He would always remind us that we have things very soft here in the West. And in the case of Buddhists, in certain circumstances, they might be putting their lives on the line by just having the courage to say that that's what they are. And he would remind us of those sorts of things. He reminded us several times, or me at least, of Thich Quang Duc, the famous Vietnamese burning monk, who's been a sort of lifelong Buddhist hero of mine. Not that I intend to burn myself to death, I hasten to add, but it's the spirit of that has a certain appeal to me, partly because I felt I needed to develop it. It wasn't natural to me, which comes back to the origins of your question. I don't think that it was something which was completely there. Maybe there was a seed there, and maybe my ambition as an actor brought it to the surface, because I just did not want anything to get in the way of my career. And then that sort of manifested in a new way later on in my Buddhist life, until eventually, and I've spoken about this on one of my talks at length, I realised that being open to new experience had been so important to me, and I try not to turn away from any new experience, And a new experience for me was chemotherapy, for example.
Yeah.
I didn't want it, but life had presented me with that option. You have this or maybe you die. So I had to face it. And you try to face these things with the most positive spirit you can. You try to face it with as much positive emotion as you can muster. So it's something which kind of evolved. Maybe the seed was already there, but I think that seed is probably there in most people. Because most, especially when you're young, you've got no experience. You're kind of green to life in a way. And you have to be open to new experience to move forwards, to make anything of your life. But I think that in a spiritual context, that needs to be developed more consciously and more fully, so that in the end, there's nothing you'll turn away from. So that's the kind of attitude, but it's definitely something which I've developed, not something which was God-given.
Yeah.
I'm sure that it helped me enormously because, especially the long solitary retreat I did about 5 years ago now.
How long was that for?
9 months.
9 months, okay.
And 9 months alone is a long time to be alone, and it really does stir up the depths. Things started to get difficult about 7 weeks into a 9 month retreat. And the difficulty was I was being confronted time and again by a rising anxiety. And I knew I had to face it. I sensed it coming on fairly early on, actually, but earlier than that. But after 7 weeks, it surfaced very, very strongly. It wasn't with me all the time. It was usually it might just be a brief period in each day, but it kept on coming. And it brought about a sort of crisis after 4 months. It was a crisis for me because I felt that if I wasn't careful, I was going to lose the benefits of doing 9 month retreat. I was going to throw away the opportunity which I partly had created, but I knew it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I was desperate not to waste it. And so there's a kind of confrontation within my mind, if you like, which was focused on the arising of this anxiety. Now, once I'd done that, once I confronted it, and it evaporated quite almost magically, it hardly touched me for the rest of that retreat. I've had similar experiences before, but this was perhaps the most profound, and I think that perhaps that was one of the things which subtly changed me. And I think that certainly that sort of experience would have helped me to face the fact that I had a life-threatening disease. It was pretty obvious. I had a serious cancer. I know prostate cancer doesn't kill most men, but mine was a stage 3 cancer. There's only 4 stages.
Yeah.
It's locally advanced prostate cancer. It's gone slightly beyond my prostate, and so, the registrar, when I first met her, said, "You have a very serious disease." I mean, she said that to me quite straight, as if to say, "Don't underestimate this. We know that a lot of people don't die of prostate cancer, but this is serious."
Yeah.
And so I was able to face it with equanimity, partly because perhaps of that long solitary retreat, or perhaps it was just the sheer momentum of 45 years Dharma practice. Difficult to say, but I think that 9 month retreat was a life-changing experience for me.
Just even basic interaction with another human being you're not going to get, so it's just really evident you've got to sort yourself out.
You have,
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But you do have companionship in a way, which is the animals.
Okay.
And they became, I regarded them as my friends.
Yeah?
Yeah, why not?
That comes across as well in the writing, or even just talking about, when you talk about Victoria Park, and I think the quarrelling coots, and there's a few other things when you're talking about birds, I think near the community. Yeah, there's a couple of really lovely paragraphs around animals. So is that something that you felt you were more sort of sensitised to on solitary, or was that there?
Well, I think I've always enjoyed watching animals, and birds especially. I always carry binoculars with me and a bird book to whatever country I go to. But of course, at Cuchilloca in Spain, there were lots of wild boar, and of course the squirrels and other pine martens and other mammals. But yeah, I've always taken a great pleasure in observing nature. It delights me.
Community, because it's very evident in your writing how grateful you are to your friends and your acupuncturists and the nurses in the hospital, and the community feature, the men upstairs feature in there as well. So what's been your experience of being ill there?
Well, in terms of my immediate environment, the men's community upstairs, everybody's been absolutely brilliant, and right from the outset they've gone well. Everybody, without exception, has gone out of their way to help me, and I needed their help, especially when I was going through chemotherapy, because it is so debilitating. And yes, I feel profoundly grateful to them, especially because, of course, they've done more for me perhaps than anybody. I'm with them every day. But it's not just them. I mean, even simple things like I put things, when I wrote my first article, when it first went, I think, on the Order website, I got such a lot of positive responses from Order members, both on the website itself, personal emails to me, people that I met in the streets, read your article and found it really inspiring, and so on and so forth. The fact that they found what I'd written inspiring helped me. And I don't know, everyone's just been so kind. I don't know why I'm surprised, but I'm not entirely surprised, but it really has brought me into contact with more kindness than I can ever recall in the whole course of my life. So, I've got a lot to be grateful for to all those people, and certainly the wider community. I mean, it's just, those responses came from the wider community, not just from people around the LBC. And of course, that again throws me back to Bante, because I could not have done this without him and his help, his training, which works. It certainly worked for me. I've got no doubts that I'm a much better human being at the age of 69 than I was when I was 24. And that's all directly attributable to him. Yeah. Without him, none of it would be possible. I've got no doubts about that. I feel deeply, deeply grateful to him for that.
You went to see him, didn't you, at some point? That you write about, I think, that you managed to get to see him after he got back from hospital.
That's right. It's before I started chemotherapy, and I was still waiting to get the results of the biopsy they'd done on my prostate. I was on the LBC winter retreat at Adhisthana. Bante was in hospital with pneumonia. I had expected to see him because he knew that I was coming to Adhisthana, but then of course he got ill, so I assumed I would not be able to see him. But the day before our retreat finished, he said he would like to see me, so I went to see him then. And I told this to him. I said, look, I feel very grateful to you because of everything you've given me, because I'm sure if I am dealing with this positively, it's entirely because of you. Without you, it would not have been possible. I've had my own part to play in that, of course, but he gave me the tools whereby I could bring that about.
I've got a bit of a dharmic question, actually, because I think during that conversation he brought up luck. Yeah, how does sort of luck fit into our framework of how we think about?
It was complete news to me.
Yeah.
I'd never thought about that. I was interested that he'd said so. I did think about it afterwards, thought quite a lot about it afterwards, but I suppose he said similar things in a way, insofar as there is some kind of random element in life that you just might find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's not karmic, it's just circumstances. So there is this kind of random element in life. So I suppose if that's true, then it would, obviously imply that, if you get caught up in one of these unfortunate random circumstances, that's bad luck. But if you avoid them, that's presumably good luck. But as I said to him, despite what's happened to me, I do not feel that I have been in any way unlucky. Because, for better or worse, it really made me have to dig deep. I've been truly tried and tested, and it's exposed my weaknesses, as I mentioned in my writing somewhere. And that's useful, that's helpful, because unless you know what your weaknesses are, how can you work upon them? It's a very necessary thing. And so, yes, in a certain sense it might be unlucky to get prostate cancer given my background, no drink, no smoking, all that, all the healthy living, the fitness, etc., but, it's just that random factor in life. Quite frank, I was rather surprised that by my own response to the cancer, right from the outset when my GP said, I'm going to refer you for suspected prostate cancer, get you an urgent appointment, but I felt very cool about it. I didn't feel thrown by it. It certainly had a very big impact upon me, but it didn't throw up fear or anxiety, whereas I might have thought that it would before it actually happened, if you see what I mean. Whether that's new or not, I don't know, but I was certainly surprised that was my response, and it has continued to be my response. I've managed to maintain my mental equilibrium pretty well. Whether I can maintain that all the way through, if it actually turned terminal at some point, I don't know, but I feel reasonably confident I deal with it positively. I've got no reason to think otherwise now. I might have doubted it before.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's really an answer, but I can't honestly think of anything else. I suppose I've become more aware of the fact that, but this is a consequence of all my practice, the fact that I seem rarely to drop into unskillful mental states. I'm not saying I'm immune to them, I certainly am not immune to them, but they hardly ever affect me. And I usually notice them pretty quickly and get out of them pretty quickly.
Yeah, that was the sense I had of reading, is your sort of awareness and your ability to really watch your mind and to catch things quite quickly and be able to pinpoint what's going on and deal with them. I didn't get a sense you were sort of trying to say that you never had fear or you never had anything sort of arise, but just being able to really catch it in the moment in a way that some of us maybe only experience when we're on retreat.
I think I got a lot better at that as a consequence of spending 9 months completely alone.
Just with your mind.
Well, exactly. There's just your mind all the time, and the mind does some funny things to you when it over sustained solitude like that. But all you've got is the environment, the animals, the elements, the trees, the rocks, and so forth. You're left alone with that and your mental states, your immediate responses to whatever stimuli are coming at you. So it's like you're always looking at the mind. Sometimes, of course, you drift off and daydream and so forth, but you can't do that for long in such solitude. It just, I don't know, it won't let you escape. Something will let you escape, whatever that it is.
Yeah.
And I think that really honed it for me. I don't think I could have done this 10 years ago, perhaps even less, but that was one of the benefits of that retreat. So maybe that's something new, I don't know.
Yeah. What about period as an anagarika as well? Because, of course, for a lot of people, they focus just on the celibacy side of it, which obviously is like a significant part of the practice, but it's much broader than that too.
Well, I've practiced chastity for 12 and a half years. I was an anagarika for just under 10, and I started when I was 44, so it covered the middle period of my life. And, I mean, in the end, I did stop for reasons which I could go into if you want, but it was similar to the sort of things we're talking about. I think that it brings you hard up against yourself in a certain sort of way, your mind, in other words. And basically, brahmacharya has 3 elements to practice: body, speech, and mind. So the precept covers all 3. The bodily element was relatively easy. I won't say it was completely easy, but it was relatively easy. The speech dimension was never any trouble to me at all, but the mental dimension was really difficult, and at times it was anyway. But it does bring you right hard against, I suppose, those aspects to your to who you are, which will seek to dodge immediate experience by turning to sex or sexual thoughts. That's not available to you if you're practicing the brahmacharya precept. Just as in solitude, talking to somebody else or trying to blame somebody else about something you've experienced is not an option to you. So there's a certain similarity. I certainly feel I benefited from that period. I do think that I learnt a lot about myself doing that, but at times it was very hard work. Yes, I do think about the future, mainly because I feel I have reached a stage in life where I have something substantial to offer other people in a way that I didn't have when I was younger. And I think that it would be a shame if that was cut off sooner rather than later. And so I would like to, basically take advantage of whatever opportunities come my way to communicate the Dharma as best I can, whether that is through living in a community, helping young men in a way sort of deepen their understanding of the Dharma, whether it means teaching classes here, whether it means going back to India, especially Nagaloka, where I did a lot of teaching and would love to get back to there. It doesn't particularly matter, but it might even be that I do more writing. But I do feel, as I say, that I have something more substantial to offer than I did when I was younger, and I want to have the maximum of opportunity of making that available to others, by whatever means. I have no specific plans, but it's in my mind. The only thing that I know that I'd really like to do, but I really have to make sure my health's sufficiently recovered, is to get back to India, and especially to Nagaloka if that should prove possible, which it may or may not do.
Yeah.
But it was certainly a severe test for me. But again, I tried to bring the most positive attitude to it that I could. I saw it as a challenge and one that I must rise to and overcome. And that's what I tried to do. I did find it very frustrating because, of course, I'm used to exercising very vigorously, at least 4 or 5, even 6 times a week. And that means a hard workout in the swimming pool, up to 2,000 metres. And for a man of my age, that's quite a lot. Yeah. And also getting on my bike. It's been very much a part of my life. I've always kept physically fit. And here I was in a situation where that was no longer possible because I just did not have the physical energy to do it. And I was warned by a chemotherapy nurse not to push hard against the fatigue in my legs because she said it's not like an athlete in training or in competition. It's of a different order. You must not resist it, which was a bit frustrating to hear, but I took it on board and just basically adjusted. You have no choice really because you just can't do it. If I'd really forced myself to exercise more than was sensible, it would have had a big kickback for me, and I didn't want that. So I think one of the main ways I dealt with this was by listening to a lot of music, because I couldn't focus my mind on reading. Sometimes I found reading really difficult because of chemo brain. But with regards to music, you can always listen to music. So I went back over a lot of my favourite pieces of music. I listened to a lot of Beethoven and Liszt and Schubert, especially over the last few months, and some other composers, mostly the Romantics for some reason. And that was a great source of solace to me. I mean, in particular, I listened extensively to Beethoven's late string quartets, and I really, really learned to love them in a way that I never had done before. Without chemotherapy, that wouldn't have happened. So I've got something to be grateful to chemotherapy for, and the fact that I couldn't just, go downstairs, jump on my bike, go to the pool or whatever. So you find ways of compensating for these losses. But of course now I'm struggling to get my physical fitness back, and that's not easy, but I'm determined as hell. I've been pretty determined most of my life, and I think that anyone who knows me well will say, that probably my most obvious positive quality is my energy. My problem has been that some people have a lack of energy and don't know how to get more energy. I've never had that problem. My problem has been, how do you deal with the excess of it? And it's still a problem for me at 69.
Do you think there's a link between physical fitness and having a sort of strong Dharma practice?
There may be, but Bantu's not been a good example of it.
Of course, yeah, because he's had
he used to walk when he was living in Kalimpong, and all his life he's been for a daily walk and kept fit in that kind of way. But I've kept up my swimming and my cycling for a long time now, and I did that partly because I took on board the fact that if I didn't keep physically fit, then I would be more prone to illness. It's quite ironical what's happened towards the end of my life, but I was very, very healthy until the cancer really. And so probably that works. And if you're healthy, it means that you can get on with your Dharma life much more easily. It means that you can teach more easily because you're not missing classes because you've got a bad cold or flu or whatever it is. I've rarely been affected by things like that. And so for me, I think it's been very important to keep physically fit. I also enjoy physical activity. Not everybody does, I know, but temperamentally, I enjoy it. It's another kind of challenge. Especially at my age, can I keep up with these young kids in the pool?
Yeah, and I guess if you've got an excess of energy, as you describe it, that actually going and doing a lot of physical exercise is probably quite a good way of channeling some of that as well.
That's one way of looking at it. But I actually enjoy it, and I find that it's a loss if I can't do it. So it was quite a significant loss for me during chemotherapy because I just couldn't do anything like that. And also not being able to get to the park easily was a loss. Every day I go to Victoria Park and I look at the waterfowl and the trees and the parakeets, wander around the pond. I love wandering around the pond, and just coming into contact with nature in that sort of way is very important to me, has always been important to me. And then suddenly that becomes really difficult because I don't have the strength to walk, was it less than a mile from here to Victoria Park. That was difficult, but again, you just have to adjust. And I did. Well, I've had several people have told me, people coming along the LBC, people I don't even know, who read it on the LBC blog, coming up and saying, I found that really helpful. I mean, in one case, a woman whose father is suffering from cancer and going through chemotherapy. And the fact that she said to me, as quite a few other people have actually, that it helped her really, well, obviously it really pleased me because I think that I love writing. It's a fun thing to do, and I've got a wicked sense of humour.
You do. It comes across.
But when someone says to you that they found what you wrote really helpful, it helped them, then it's wonderful because you feel you've done something positive, you've done something of real worth. It's not just me enjoying myself on my keyboard, having a bit of fun. It's something which actually helps others, and that's the most important thing of all.
And the importance of humour in the spiritual life. I think we can underestimate it sometimes. It is really, well, because I guess what it is that it's holding a bigger perspective on what we're going through with a sort of lightness as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's part of the comedy of life, and I comment upon this in one of my chapters because it struck me one night. I was actually very, very high on steroids. The sort of the connection between tragedy and comedy, and the fact that you can't really ultimately separate them out, but that they both serve a very positive and useful function. Tragedy, in a way, reminding you of the dangerous situation that we're in, the samsara, that is, and the fact that everything is uncertain, it could change very, very quickly. You could be plunged into the most terrible suffering at a moment's notice. We never know. There's that dimension of things, but then there's this sort of just the sheer comedy of human foibles, my own included. I'm quite happy to laugh at my own. I've got plenty of them, but it lightens that burden. And this really, really struck me during chemotherapy. But again, coming back to your point about humour in the spiritual life, I'm not sure how important it really is, but I think that it certainly helps to humanise things. It humanises other people, it humanises you. I like to laugh, not just at other people, but at myself. I mean, sometimes I do. I've done some crazy things in my life.